My son, the doctor, was trying to get rid of me. He secretly swapped my life-saving heart medication with sugar pills and then called me a dramatic burden as my health failed. He thought he was untouchable, that his medical degree made his lies the truth. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know, I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Helen Sterling, and at 70 years old, I had learned to measure my life in heartbeats. Not in the poetic sense, but in the literal clinical one. The steady, sometimes faltering rhythm of the organ in my chest had become the metronome of my days. After a mild heart attack 2 years ago, my life, once a vibrant tapestry of my work as a head librarian, my deep love for my late husband Robert and the joy of raising our son David, had shrunk to a quiet, carefully managed existence. And my son himself had insisted on becoming the manager of that existence. Dr. David Sterling. My greatest pride, my deepest sorrow. At 44, he was a respected cardiologist at City General, the very hospital where I was now a frequent patient. I had sacrificed everything to see him through medical school. After Robert passed, a loss that hollowed out the world, I had sold our larger family home on the lake and moved into my current modest condominium. A significant portion of the proceeds from that sale had gone directly to paying for David's tuition, his expensive textbooks, his endless fees. To see him in his crisp white coat, a stethoscope draped around his neck, had been the culmination of my life's work. I had raised a healer, a man who saved lives. I trusted him implicitly, utterly. That trust, I see now, was my greatest failing, a blind spot born of a mother's love. While David had always been involved in my care since my heart attack, his insistence on personally managing my prescriptions was a more recent development. It began 6 months ago after a minor dizzy spell. A hot, humid afternoon where the world briefly tilted, caused me to forget a single dose of a non-critical vitamin. He seized on the incident with an alarming, almost predatory intensity. He arrived that evening, his face a mask of grave concern. "Mom," he'd said, his voice full of a calm, professional authority that left no room for argument, "you can't be managing all these prescriptions on your own anymore. It's too complex. You could get the dosages wrong. Look what just happened. Simple vitamin. What if you forget your beta blocker? This is a serious matter. Let me handle it. I'll sort your pills for you each week." It had seemed like a loving, sensible gesture. My son, the esteemed cardiologist, personally overseeing his mother's medication. What could be safer? So began the new ritual. Every Sunday afternoon, David would visit, bringing with him a small blue 7-day pill organizer. He would sit at my kitchen table, his back to me, and carefully, silently, sort the various tablets from my prescription bottles into their little plastic compartments. "Here you go, Mom," he'd say, snapping the lids shut with a series of sharp, definitive clicks. "Just take the morning ones with breakfast and the evening ones with dinner." Simple. But my health, instead of improving under his expert care, seemed to be slowly, inexplicably worsening. The dizziness I had experienced before my heart attack returned with a vengeance, sometimes leaving me clinging to the furniture to stay upright, the room swimming in a nauseating blur. A profound, bone-deep fatigue settled over me, a weariness that had nothing to do with my age or my grief. It was a heavy, leaden blanket that smothered my energy. And the palpitations, the frightening, fluttering sensation in my chest that the medication was supposed to control, became more frequent, more violent, often waking me in the dead of night with my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. When I would voice my concerns, my voice trembling with a fear I tried to hide, David would listen with that patient, dismissive smile he had perfected. He would pat my hand, his touch cool, clinical. "Now, Mom," he'd say, his voice a soothing, condescending balm, "that's just your anxiety talking. It's a very common side effect of beta blockers. You're becoming hyper-aware of your own heartbeat. You read too many medical journals at the library. You need to relax. Trust your doctor." "But David," I'd insist, "it feels worse than before. The dizziness. I almost fell yesterday." "Perfectly normal age-related postural hypotension," he'd reply, the medical jargon a wall I couldn't possibly scale. "You stood up too quickly. It's nothing to worry about. The medication is working exactly as it should. Your chart looks fine." His wife, Gabrielle, a woman whose ambition was as sharp and as polished as her designer handbags, was even less sympathetic. She saw my illness as a personal affront, an inconvenient, time-consuming burden on their perfect, high-powered lives. "Honestly, Helen," she'd said to me one afternoon after I'd had a particularly bad dizzy spell while she was visiting, "you have to stop focusing on every little ache and pain. You have the best doctor in the city taking care of you, your own son. You need to trust him and stop being so dramatic. It's very draining for David, you know. He has enough stress at the hospital." And so I did. I trusted him. I pushed my own fears, my own body's desperate signals, aside. He was the doctor. I was just the old, anxious, dramatic mother. I told myself my symptoms were in my head, a product of my fear, my loneliness. I tried to be less of a burden. I stopped complaining. But the real reason for my decline, the monstrous truth hiding behind his professional facade, had nothing to do with anxiety or old age. It had to do with greed. My modest condo was paid for. My late husband had left me with a small but comfortable investment portfolio. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to guarantee my own comfortable old age, and upon my death, would provide a very handsome inheritance for my son. An inheritance that he and his materialistic wife had apparently decided they were tired of waiting for. I began to notice small things, dissonant notes in the symphony of their perfect lives. A new, ridiculously expensive German sports car in their driveway. Gabrielle showing off a new diamond tennis bracelet at a family gathering, claiming it was a clever investment. Their constant talk of a lavish, month-long European vacation they were planning for the summer. How could they afford such things on their salaries, especially with the crippling cost of private school? A complaint I heard often. The answer was a suspicion so dark, so unthinkable, I could barely allow it to form in my mind. Was my son, my doctor's son, the healer I had sacrificed everything for, deliberately making me sicker? Was my slow, painful decline not a tragedy he was fighting, but a project he was managing? The thought was monstrous. I pushed it away, ashamed of my own disloyal mind. This was David. My boy. He saved lives. He would never ever harm his own mother. But the suspicion once planted began to grow, a cold, poisonous vine wrapping itself around my heart. And I knew with a certainty that terrified me, that I had to find a way to learn the truth before it was too late. My life, I was beginning to fear, depended on it. The gaslighting was a masterpiece of medical authority and filial condescension. Every symptom I described, every fear I voiced, was met with a calm, professional explanation that made me feel foolish, anxious, and profoundly old. "The fluttering in your chest, Mom?" David would say, his fingers on my wrist, his expression one of pained patience. "Those are just benign palpitations. Very common. Your EKG is perfectly stable. It's the anxiety that's making you notice them more." The dizzy spells when I stand up? I'd ask, my voice trembling. "Postural hypotension," he'd recite as if from a textbook. "Your circulatory system isn't as responsive as it used to be. It's a normal part of the aging process. You just need to move more slowly." He had an answer for everything. An answer that was always plausible, always wrapped in the impenetrable jargon of his profession, and always designed to make me feel like the problem was not in my body but in my mind. My daughter-in-law, Gabrielle, was his willing and often more cruel accomplice in this psychological warfare. "Honestly, Helen," she'd say with an exasperated sigh, "you have to stop Googling your symptoms. You're working yourself into a panic over nothing. David is a top cardiologist. You have the best care in the city. Just relax and let him do his job." And so I tried. I tried to believe them. I tried to believe that the escalating weakness, the terrifying episodes where my heart felt like a trapped bird beating against my ribs, the constant disorienting dizziness, were all just the normal, inevitable decline of a 70-year-old woman. But my body was screaming a different story, a story they refused to hear. The final, brutal confirmation of their monstrous deceit came on a Tuesday. I had had a particularly bad night, my heart racing so erratically I was afraid to fall asleep. In the morning I felt weak, drained, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold my teacup. David arrived for his weekly pill-sorting ritual, his face a mask of professional concern. "You look terrible, Mom," he said, his voice laced with a false sympathy that now made my skin crawl. "I had a bad night, David," I whispered. My heart, it was racing all night. I was scared. He just shook his head, a look of weary resignation on his face. "Anxiety, Mom," he said, patting my hand. "We've talked about this. You're stressing yourself out and it's affecting your heart rhythm. You need to calm down." Then came the final, unforgivable blow. He looked at me, at my frail, trembling state, and he said, his voice dropping to a confidential, almost conspiratorial tone, "Honestly, Mom, you've become too much of a burden. I don't know how much more of this Gabrielle and I can take. Your constant worrying, your endless symptoms. It's exhausting. We have our own lives, our own careers to think about." Burden. The word hung in the air between us, a poison dart that struck me directly in the heart. My son, my doctor's son, the man whose life I had dedicated my own to building, had just told me that my sickness, the very sickness he was supposed to be treating, was an inconvenience to him. I stared at him, my vision blurring with tears of pure, unadulterated shock and pain. And in that moment I saw him not as my son, but as a stranger, a cold, cruel stranger with my son's face. As he sat at my kitchen table, his back to me, carefully sorting the pills for the week, a new, desperate idea began to form in my mind. It was a long shot, a wild, almost insane gamble. But my life, I now realized, might depend on it. While he was focused on his task, his movements precise and clinical, I did something I had never done before. I stood up from my armchair, my own movements slow, silent, my soft slippers making no sound on the kitchen tiles. I crept up behind him, my heart hammering. On the table, beside the open pill organizer, lay the 2 prescription bottles from the pharmacy. One was my beta blocker, the other my blood thinner. And beside them, where he had just placed it after taking it from his pocket, was a third unmarked plastic bottle, filled with small white pills that looked identical to my heart medication. With a hand that trembled with a terrifying, audacious hope, I reached out. As he was carefully placing the pills into the Tuesday compartment, his attention focused on the small plastic squares. I, with a single swift movement, palmed one of the small white pills from his unmarked bottle. Then I retreated back to my armchair, my heart pounding, the tiny chalky tablet a secret, terrifying truth in my clenched fist. He finished his task, snapped the lids of the organizer shut with a series of sharp final clicks, and left, reminding me to take it easy, and try not to worry so much. After the door closed behind him, I sat there for a long time, staring at the small white pill in my palm. It looked exactly like my heart medication. But my instincts, the instincts of a woman who had spent a lifetime observing, were screaming at me. That evening I did not take the pills from the organizer. I hid them under my tongue, then discreetly flushed them when I was alone. And the next morning I did the same. For 24 hours I took none of the pills he had given me. And a strange, terrifying, and wonderful thing happened. I began to feel better. The profound dizziness lessened into a manageable lightheadedness. The frantic, fluttering palpitations subsided into a calmer, more regular rhythm. The oppressive fog of fatigue that had been my constant companion began to lift, just a little, like a morning mist burning off under a rising sun. It was undeniable. I felt better without the medication my son was so diligently providing. The horrifying truth was now inescapable. He wasn't healing me. He was harming me. He had, I now knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, swapped my life-saving heart medication with a placebo, a simple sugar pill, a nothing. And he had been doing it for months, watching me decline, dismissing my real life-threatening symptoms as anxiety and old age, all while waiting, I now realized, for my failing heart to finally, conveniently give out. The monster was real. And he was my son. The realization that my own son, by Dr. Son, was deliberately harming me was a truth so monstrous it threatened to shatter my sanity more effectively than any gaslighting he could devise. For 2 days I lived in a state of quiet, cold terror. I continued my charade, pretending to take the pills from the organizer he had so carefully prepared, but instead, I would discreetly flush them down the toilet, my hands shaking. And with each dose I didn't take, my mind grew clearer, my body stronger. The fog was lifting, and in the harsh, unforgiving light of this new clarity, I saw the full, horrifying scope of his betrayal. But what could I do? A direct accusation would be met with his usual, professional dismissal. He would call me paranoid, delusional. He would use his medical authority as a shield, painting me as a senile old woman having a psychotic break. It would be my word, the word of a confused old woman, against the word of a respected cardiologist. I knew who the world would believe. No. I needed more than a suspicion. I needed more than my own slowly improving health as evidence. I needed proof. Cold, hard, undeniable scientific proof. My old life, my life as a head librarian, had taught me one thing. The answer to almost any question can be found if you know how to look for it. My body was weak, yes, but my mind, my librarian's mind, was still a formidable thing. I knew how to research. I knew how to find information. And I knew that my son, in his arrogance, had made a critical mistake. He had assumed that my world was limited to the four walls of this condo, that my only source of information was him. He had forgotten that I had a library card, a laptop, and a lifetime of experience in a quiet, methodical pursuit of the truth. My quest for proof began online, through the city library's digital portal, a resource I knew how to navigate as well as the back of my own hand. I started by researching my own prescribed medications, the beta blocker metoprolol and the blood thinner warfarin. I read not the patient-facing websites with their simple explanations, but the dense clinical pharmacology journals I now had access to. I learned about their therapeutic levels, their half-lives, the specific ways they were metabolized by the body. Then I began to research my symptoms. I made a list. The dizziness, the heart palpitations, the profound fatigue, the episodes of confusion. I cross-referenced them with the known side effects of my medication. And just as David had so confidently claimed, they were all listed as potential, though rare, side effects. He had been clever. He had chosen his lies well. But then I did something else. I searched for the symptoms of not taking the medication. I looked up the symptoms of untreated atrial fibrillation, of uncontrolled hypertension. And there they were. Dizziness. Heart palpitations. Fatigue. Confusion. My symptoms were not the side effects of the drug. They were the direct, predictable consequences of its absence. My heart pounded with a mixture of terror and a grim, vindictive satisfaction. I was not crazy. My body had been telling me the truth all along. But this was still not enough. This was my interpretation, my research. I needed to know what was in those little white pills he was giving me. I took one of the pills from the Wednesday compartment of the organizer, one of the fake ones I had saved from the day of my discovery. I examined it under my strongest magnifying glass. It looked identical to my real medication. But as I rolled the small chalky tablet in my palm, I saw the crucial difference. My real metoprolol from the bottle I still had hidden away in the back of my closet from before he took over my care, had a tiny M etched on one side. This one was a perfect, unnerving blank. It was a counterfeit. A poison disguised as a promise. My mind raced. How could I get it tested without raising his suspicion? I couldn't just walk into a pharmacy. I needed a plan, a way to get an official, undeniable analysis. My librarian's brain, so used to solving complex research queries, began to formulate a strategy. It was a desperate, brilliant, and incredibly risky plan. It was a plan that would require me to put my own life in jeopardy, to walk willingly into the heart of the crisis he had created for me. But it was the only way I could see to get the proof I needed, to expose him for the monster he truly was. I would have to become a vessel of evidence. I would resume taking his sugar pills just for a few days. I would let the symptoms return, let my heart race, let the dizziness consume me. I would let my body become a living testament to his neglect. And then, at a moment of my own choosing, I would orchestrate a collapse. Not a real one if I could help it, but a performance so convincing it would be undeniable. I would call 911. And I would insist, with every ounce of strength I possessed, on being taken to one place and one place only, his hospital. City General. It was a terrible gamble. My heart condition was real. To deliberately withhold my real medication was to play a dangerous game with my own life. But what choice did I have? He was already playing a game with my life, a slow, methodical game of erasure. My plan was simply to change the rules, to move the game board to a place where I for once might have a chance to win. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I hid my real medication securely. I wrote down a detailed account of my suspicions, of my son's behavior, of the blank pills, of my plan. I sealed it in an envelope and mailed it to my sister in another state, with instructions to open it only if something happened to me. It was my insurance policy, my final word from beyond the grave, just in case my gamble failed. Then I waited for the right moment. The day before my next scheduled checkup with him. A day when my absence from home would be noticed. A day when my arrival at his hospital would be a professional complication he could not ignore. On that morning I took his sugar pill as usual. I waited an hour, my heart already beginning its familiar, frightening flutter. Then, with a prayer on my lips and a lifetime of a mother's love curdled into a cold, hard resolve, I picked up the phone and dialed 911. "My name is Helen Sterling," I said, my voice a practiced, convincing whisper of pain and fear. "I'm having chest pains. I think I'm having a heart attack. Please, you have to take me to City General. My son is a doctor there." The final, desperate act of my story had begun. The arrival of the paramedics was a chaotic whirlwind of efficiency and calm, professional voices. They found me on the floor of my living room, where I had deliberately, carefully lowered myself, my hand clutched to my chest, my breathing shallow and ragged. It was a performance, yes, but the terror I felt, the frantic, irregular beating of my own heart, was terrifyingly real. I was playing a dangerous game and the stakes were my own life. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" a young paramedic asked, his face a mask of concern. "What's your name?" "Helen Sterling," I gasped, my voice a convincing whisper of pain. "My heart, the medication. I think something is wrong." They worked with a swift, practiced urgency, strapping monitors to my chest, taking my blood pressure, which was, I knew, dangerously high. "She's an AFib," I heard one of them say to the other. "Let's get her to City General fast. Her son is a cardiologist there." Perfect. My request, delivered in a state of apparent medical crisis, had been accepted without question. As they wheeled me out on a stretcher, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a scene from a movie. The familiar walls of my condo receded, the world becoming a blur of motion and concerned faces. The ride in the ambulance was a symphony of sirens and the steady beep of the heart monitor, a frantic, irregular rhythm that was the soundtrack to my desperate gamble. I closed my eyes and prayed. Prayed that I would survive this. Prayed that my plan would work. And prayed for the soul of the son who had forced me to take such a terrible, life-threatening risk to expose his monstrous betrayal. The emergency room at City General was a world I knew well, but from the other side. For years I had volunteered here, pushing a book cart, reading to patients, offering a small measure of comfort in a place of pain and fear. Now I was one of them, a patient on a gurney, a collection of symptoms on a chart. As they wheeled me into a treatment bay, the overhead fluorescent lights a harsh, unforgiving glare, a young, sharp-eyed doctor with a calm, authoritative demeanor took charge. Her name tag read, Dr. Aisha Roberts. "All right, what have we got?" she asked the paramedics, her gaze already scanning my monitors. They gave her a quick, professional report. 70-year-old female, Helen Sterling, history of atrial fibrillation and hypertension, found collapsed at home with complaints of severe chest pain and dizziness. Her son is Dr. David Sterling, on staff here. Dr. Roberts nodded, her expression focused, professional. "Okay, let's get a full blood panel, cardiac enzymes, and a 12-lead EKG. What's her medication regimen?" This was the moment. "She takes metoprolol and warfarin daily," the paramedic replied, reading from the list I had given them. "Her son, the doctor, manages her prescriptions." Just then, as if on cue, the curtain to my bay was ripped open, and David himself strode in, his face a mask of concerned, professional authority. He had clearly been paged. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his eyes scanning my monitors, his presence immediately dominating the small space. "Mom, are you all right?" He turned to Dr. Roberts, a subtle but unmistakable air of condescension in his tone. "I'm Dr. Sterling, her son and her primary cardiologist. I'll take it from here." Dr. Roberts, however, did not flinch. She stood her ground, her gaze meeting his with a cool, professional steadiness. "Dr. Sterling," she said, her voice calm but firm, "your mother was brought in with signs of acute cardiac distress. As the attending ER physician, she is currently my patient. I have already ordered a full workup." "That's not necessary," David said quickly, a little too quickly. "I know her history. It's most likely just a panic attack. Her anxiety has been very high lately. We can just get her stabilized and I'll take her home." He was trying to take control, to shut down the investigation before it even began. But Dr. Roberts was not to be deterred. She was a professional, following a strict protocol. And something, I could see it in her sharp, intelligent eyes, had already made her suspicious. Perhaps it was David's attempt to immediately override her authority. Perhaps it was the disconnect between my anxiety and the very real, very dangerous arrhythmia displayed on the monitor. "With all due respect, doctor," she replied, her voice now holding a note of steel, "I will not be discharging a 70-year-old cardiac patient who collapsed at home until I have a full, clear picture of what is going on. The blood work and the EKG are not optional." She then added the words I had been praying to hear, the words that would be the key to my entire plan. "And given her prescribed medications, I am also ordering a full therapeutic drug monitoring panel and a toxicology screen. I want to know exactly what is and what is not in her system." I saw the flicker of panic in David's eyes. A look so fleeting, so quickly masked that anyone else might have missed it. But I saw it, and I knew. He was trapped. That's an unnecessary expense," he stammered. Her insurance is excellent," Dr. Roberts cut him off coolly. "I've already checked. Now if you'll excuse me, doctor, I have a patient to attend to." She turned her back on him, a clear dismissal, and began to give orders to the nurses. David stood there for a moment, his face a mixture of fury and a dawning, terrible fear. He had walked into his own hospital, his own kingdom, a place where he was a respected authority, and had been completely, utterly outmaneuvered by a sharp young doctor and a quiet old woman on a gurney. He had tried to use his medical authority as a weapon to gaslight me, to control me, to slowly, quietly erase me. But I had used my own body, my own vulnerability, as the ultimate, undeniable piece of evidence. I had delivered myself to the one place where truth is not a matter of opinion but of science. The blood was drawn, the vials sent to the lab. The results would be back in an hour. And they would expose my son for the monster he truly was. The hour I spent waiting for the blood test results was the longest of my life. David hovered nearby, a thunderous, impotent presence. He tried to dismiss Dr. Roberts' concerns to the nurses, speaking of his mother's long history of health anxiety. He tried to speak to me, his voice a low, threatening murmur. "Mom, you need to tell them this is all a misunderstanding. You need to tell them you forgot to take your pills this morning." But I just looked away, my silence a more powerful weapon than any argument. My fate and his was no longer in our hands. It was in the hands of the hospital laboratory. Dr. Aisha Roberts returned to my cubicle, a tablet in her hand, her expression unreadable. She was followed by a kind-faced older woman she introduced as Mrs. Davis, a hospital social worker. That's when I knew. The presence of a social worker meant this was no longer just a medical event. Dr. Roberts did not look at David. She looked directly at me. "Mrs. Sterling," she began, her voice calm and professional, "we have your lab results back. And they are highly unusual." David took a step forward. As I said, she likely missed a dose. Dr. Roberts held up a hand, silencing him without even a glance in his direction. Her focus was entirely on me. "Mrs. Sterling," she said, her voice now full of a gentle, profound empathy, "your blood work shows 0 therapeutic level of metoprolol, and no trace of warfarin whatsoever. According to these results, you have not had your prescribed heart medication in your system for at least several days." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Which would explain," she continued, "why you are in atrial fibrillation and why you collapsed. Your symptoms are not anxiety, Mrs. Sterling. They are the direct, predictable result of acute medication withdrawal." The social worker, Mrs. Davis, stepped forward. "Mrs. Sterling," she said softly, "the paramedics noted that your son, Dr. Sterling, manages your daily medication for you. Is that correct?" All eyes in the small cubicle were now on me. This was the moment. The culmination of my desperate, terrifying gamble. I looked at my son, at his face now ashen, his confident demeanor completely shattered, his eyes wide with a dawning, panicked horror. I took a deep breath, my voice clear and steady. "Yes," I said. "That is correct. My son, the cardiologist, brings me my pills every Sunday, all sorted for the week. I take them every single day exactly as he tells me to." The silence that followed was absolute, profound. The implication of my words was undeniable, horrifying. Dr. Roberts exchanged a look with the social worker, a look of grim, professional understanding. David just stood there, his mouth opening and closing but no sound coming out. He had been caught. Utterly, completely, scientifically caught. The events that followed were a swift, professional, and devastating dismantling of my son's life. Dr. Roberts and Mrs. Davis asked him to step outside my cubicle. I could hear their low, serious voices, then David's frantic, stammering denials. But his lies, his authority, his reputation, they all dissolved in the face of the irrefutable black-and-white data from the lab report. The hospital's legal and ethics committees were immediately notified. David was suspended from his duties, pending a full investigation. He was escorted from the hospital by security, not as a respected cardiologist, but as a potential criminal, a man who had used his medical knowledge to attempt to harm his own mother. The story, of course, did not stay within the hospital walls. The state medical board launched its own investigation. Faced with the hospital's internal report, the lab results, and my own quiet, detailed testimony, the outcome was inevitable. Dr. David Sterling, my son, my pride and joy, was stripped of his medical license, his career, the very identity he had built on the foundation of my sacrifices, permanently, irrevocably gone. But it didn't end there. The district attorney's office, alerted by Adult Protective Services, reviewed my case. His actions, deliberately withholding life-saving medication from a vulnerable, dependent elder, were not just unethical, they were criminal. He was charged with felony elder abuse and reckless endangerment. I did not have to testify at his trial. The evidence was overwhelming without me. He was found guilty, his face, splashed across the local news, a mask of hollow-eyed defeat. He was sentenced not to prison, my one small silent prayer that was answered, but to a long, humiliating term of probation and court-mandated community service at a public health clinic in the city's poorest neighborhood. I recovered slowly but surely under the care of real doctors on real medication. I eventually moved into a beautiful assisted living community, my condo sold to fund a new life of peace and security. Anne Gabrielle, my daughter-in-law, the woman whose desire for luxury had fueled her husband's monstrous plot? I heard through my sister that she had left him the moment the first legal notice arrived. A man with a ruined career and no inheritance was of no use to her. She vanished, a ghost of greed, leaving my son to face the consequences of their shared cruelty entirely alone. I saw him one last time, a few months after his sentencing. I was at a small cafe and he was outside, sweeping the sidewalk, his face gaunt, his expensive suit replaced by a simple janitor's uniform. He saw me and for a long moment our eyes met. I saw in his gaze not hatred, not anger, but a profound, bottomless well of shame. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, of defeat, then turned back to his work. My revenge was complete. It was not a victory I celebrated. It was a tragedy, a profound, heartbreaking tragedy of a son's greed and a mother's broken heart. But it was also a story of quiet strength, of a woman who, when faced with the ultimate betrayal, had used her intelligence, her courage, and the simple, undeniable power of the truth to save her own life. He had tried to expose me as a frail, foolish old woman. Instead, the world had exposed him as a monster. And I, Helen Sterling, the retired librarian, had finally, blessedly found my peace.